Welcome to Two Expats Abroad. Today we're talking with Nathan James Thomas, the editor of Exisle Publishing, founder of Intrepid Times, and a communication strategist behind a seven-figure microbrand TRASKA Watches. Nathan has gone from digital nomad to publishing lead. He's spent the last decade navigating the intersection of global travel and high-stakes business. Welcome to Two Expats Abroad, Nathan.
It's a pleasure to be here. And look, I'm not actually here to be an editor. I'm here to be a commentator. But I would say two expats abroad. Like, if you've told us you're expats, you need to tell us you're abroad. Like, is there not some tautology there? It's up for debate, I think.
Two became three.
Two became three, yes. Exactly. Three expats, all of whom are abroad. True.
Let's go meta here. Tell us a little bit about yourself in your own words.
Yeah, I'm someone who comes from a country where you either don't travel or travel a lot. New Zealand is 2,000 kilometers away from our nearest neighbor. So by the time you've gotten even as far as Australia, you've already traveled the equivalent of the distance between us in Poland and Lisbon, which between here and there would be, 10 countries. And in New Zealand, it's just an ocean. So I also come from an immigrant family. My parents migrated from England just before I was born. So I never felt particularly rooted there. Travel seemed very natural to me. And when you travel, you need to earn a living in order to keep traveling. And I turned to the internet to figure out how to do that and have been using various ways of writing and communicating and helping other people do so in order to facilitate traveling or living overseas since I was 17.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that. I read somewhere on the internet that you used to have a self-help blog.
Yeah, when I was very young, and I mean like 14 or so, I started a little blogspot.com blog on a subject matter that really interested me at the time. When I use the acronym NLP, people now think natural language processing in the context of AI. It used to be this, I don't necessarily want to say pseudoscience,
I know
but
what you're talking about.
a self-help modality known as neurolinguistic programming. And as a teenager, I thought this would give me magic powers, essentially, to achieve my goals, to persuade people, to help me in all sorts of situations. And there's a whole community of people, some very well-meaning, accomplished people, others perhaps with less pure motives in that community. And I became really just deep into it until I was in my early 20s, around 20 or 21. Sold that business to a competitor and kind of walked away from it and haven't really looked back.
14 to 21, you had essentially a business that you arguably really successful to the point where you could sell.
Yeah, I mean, it was not a huge amount of money. It was for a teenager. I mean, I paid for my university fees, which are not expensive in New Zealand, and it gave me financial freedom to the point where I could take a gap year between university and high school and spend that year traveling Europe entirely self-funded, which was really exciting and a sense of freedom. And once you've had that, it gets very hard to not have that. And I think I thought, having done this once, it'd be quite easy for me to start again and create another business, but it actually took me 5 or 6 years. I was in my late 20s before I was earning as much as I was when I was 19. It took me a long time to climb back up that ladder.
Wow.
And what was the catalyst for Intrepid Times, and what's the timeline between that first blog and...
Good question. I think there'd be a 2 or 3 year gap between selling that first one and starting Intrepid Times. After I'd sold it, I didn't want to have anything to do with the internet, writing only creatively, like artistically. I didn't want to do anything remotely commercial with writing. I'd moved to China at the time. I was living in Chengdu, barely online, and wanted nothing to do with it. But of course, that's what I knew how to do. And inevitably, I found myself starting a website. And I was earning money then, as the amount that I sold the business for it inevitably ran out as a copywriter. Because that was one of the skills I'd learned when building that business, how to create a good landing page, write an email campaign that converts. So I was hired out to do that for other people. And as I started writing commercially, I wanted somewhere that was kind of a safe space where I could create and foster writing that was entirely values-driven, that was just stuff that I wanted to read or wanted to have written, rather than stuff that was going to chase a search engine result or to build an audience. Of course, we ended up doing that, but it took a long time.
And I think I want to come back to neuro-linguistic programming, because at 14 to be exposed to something like that, that's interesting, because not many 14-year-olds are being exposed to that. Where was that exposure? Who was responsible for it? And was it self-led education or?
You know what? I wish there was a more impressive sounding origin story, but I think it was the YouTube videos of this famous, I don't know if he's still famous, I assume he still is, magician called Darren Brown.
Oh, yeah.
And he would do all of these mind tricks. Now, it turns out, I don't have any insider knowledge, but I have a strong hunch that most of it is just tricks of the trade, and he's not actually doing real psychology. I'm not asserting that, I'm just guessing. But I believed very strongly that he was using these incredible psychological powers, and you sort of go down the Google rabbit hole and you read the forums and people are like, he's using this NLP technique. Oh my God, what is that? And I would buy all of the books, I would read depending on how far up the chain you go, the origin content of NLP by the founding pair is quite academic and quite dense. And I'll be reading these like serious books trying to understand, like, there is real stuff there, and then there's also a lot of fluff, exactly. And I was trying to understand what's real there. And there was some useful stuff that I take away to this day, but there's also a lot of things that I started to find myself very not congruous with or not comfortable with.
And did that expose you to, at the time, being 14, 15, 16, 17, wherever you go on that journey with that business, you as a young male, did you, in that industry, you would have been exposed to peers way beyond your years?
Oh, yeah, very much so. I mean, I would teach seminars. I taught my first one in Auckland, New Zealand, when I was 16. And I was definitely the youngest person in the room. Like, there were people 40s, 60s beyond.
Yeah. When I see those audiences, it's typically 30 plus, 40 plus, I would argue. And there you was, seminars.
People have different entry points to that kind of world, right? A lot of people, you seek out those things if you're angsty and unsatisfied, as pretty much every 14-year-old is. And a lot of people seek it out in midlife. You know, it's a midlife crisis sounds quite dismissive, but but having, you know, dissatisfaction with your life and wanting to find a way to break through that. I mean, that's what brings people into that world. And there is a level at which it is quite helpful. Like, there are legitimate ways of thinking and communicating that can be more effective than others. At the same time, there can be something a little bit exploitative with some of the promises that were made. I've not kept up with the industry. It might have matured since, but some of the way the marketing is done in that space can be very, you know, everything is promised on not necessarily a very firm framework.
But the journey took you to sale. You sell the business at 21, an incredibly young age to have sold your first business. Was entrepreneurship, was business, was that always part of your DNA? Is that something that you stumbled into? Is it something that was a conscious decision?
I think so. I mean, I come from an entrepreneurial family. I mean, my grandfather started a book publishing company. My dad started a book publishing company. So and here I am starting essentially an online publication. So it is, there is a pattern there that repeats. And there was also something very satisfying. I'm sure you both know this too, as people who've built businesses. There's something really satisfying in creating something. And I remember I would sit, and I was often very bored in high school. And I would sit, we used to have, this ages me a little bit, we'd sit in computer labs. So there'd be one room in the school where the computers were. And there'd be these huge, Macintoshes that looked like little raincoats. And you would I'd sit there at the computer having done the work that we were assigned, and I would write articles for this blog during class time. And I would feel a much greater sense of pride or satisfaction having accomplished that people would actually go and read as well. It's very exciting as a writer to be read. And there's something in that same feeling I think I seek out now with the other businesses I'm involved in.
And your blog is different. You say that you don't like, there's a certain type of blog that is just giving listicles and stuff like that. I get the sense that irks you.
Yeah, I mean, I understand why it is done. I look in my years as a content strategist, I've wrote or directed the writing of hundreds of listicles. I think AI has sort of eliminated that. We haven't realized it yet, but it's kind of taken away that slice of work for writers or copywriters because it's so easily replicated. It's such a formulaic, shallow thing to do, but they're very clickable. It's very tempting to click on something that says 8 this, 10 that. It serves you something. What it doesn't do is it doesn't go deep, and it doesn't allow a writer to really stretch narrative muscles. I mean, a real article is a journey, right? You are taken from a beginning, you go through some kind of challenge, something changes in your perception or your
The
understanding.
hero's journey. Yeah.
Hero's journey, and at the end you're different. So that's why there's a cool technique that a lot of writers do. When you must have noticed this, the first paragraph and the last paragraph, they'll sort of end on the same sentence, and you could begin with, it was raining outside, and then something happens, and then the rain continued to fall or something. And why it hits you is because that same image in your mind, you relate to it completely differently, and you realize that, oh my God, that means something totally different to me now as a result of what I've read in this article. A listicle just sort of slaps the surface. I mean, look, if I'm going to Barcelona and I want to take my wife out for a nice evening, I'm going to read 10 best cocktail bars in Barcelona. I'm not necessarily going to read the poetic article about it. So they have their place, but I think writing can do a lot more than that.
It must be really frustrating though, and I read a couple of your most recent articles, and you are bringing AI into the exploratory nature of writing. So I think you tasked yourself with ChatGPT telling you followed it to the letter of the law was it Albania?
It was in Tirana, the capital of Albania. Yes, we have this series on Intrepid Times called Travel Writers Test AI Travel Advice. So it is now a big thing being talked about that a hostel world did a study, and depending on the demographic, more than half of travelers now use AI to help plan their trips. And there's a spectrum for that, of course. But there was a famous piece in CNN, I think 2 days ago, about people that were directed to an entire valley or lake, I think it was somewhere in Norway, that just simply does not exist. And this AI travel advice can be helpful, but it can be dubious, and you have really no way of telling unless you test it. And we decided that we would. So the articles are quite funny because the writers take literally AI suggestions, but report on it in real life. So, it will send you to bars that don't exist. It will, my associate editor, Tom, was sent to order like a strong cocktail in somewhere in Tallinn, Estonia at 10 in the morning, and ChatGPT said, this is what all the locals do. And when he ordered it, like, you sure? Like, it was like such weird looks, or told to order dishes that don't exist. You feel very nervous when doing it because you're kind of going outside of social norms. Like, you're knowingly doing stuff that just doesn't feel wise to you. And so the resulting stories can be quite entertaining. We've commissioned a few more pieces from different cities, which I'm looking forward to.
Likewise, because the couple that I read were fascinating. It was so funny. Like, I mean, naturally just understanding the journey that you've gone to even think of doing something like that, but then the disaster that unfolded. Because I think on yours in particular, 3 of the places weren't open or didn't exist maybe.
One place trying to scam me, out of 30 euros for one beer. I ended up making such a fuss that they ended up overpaying me. So I ended up making a profit there, but it was just like it was not somewhere that any local would ever send someone to. It was just clearly a tourist trap place. And you'd find that with the AI travel advice, it's either extremely predictable or completely bananas. There's nothing that's kind of like edgy but interesting, which is what a good guide would get for you. So it was a really interesting process. I mean, there is among travel writing, among writing in general, people who write for a profession, people who love reading, there is a kind of panic moment with AI, right? The sky is falling. And this was our way of reckoning with it. You know what? Like, here's what we can do as actual people that you can't do. Go to the places that you talk about, and let's partner in a way on these articles.
You've written a couple of books. How did you move from blogging to writing books?
So, I mean, this was very much an advantage of nepotism. I mean, I mentioned my father being a book publisher, and I think we both thought we were doing each other favors here, because when you run a small independent book publisher, it actually can be quite a lot of work to keep feeding. It's called the front list, the engine that puts new books out into the hands of your reps. And we'd experimented with the travel space. And it was this idea that my dad and I came up with. Travel Your Way was the first one. And I wrote it in 2019. The idea was that there are a lot of books that teach you where to travel to. There aren't books that necessarily teach you how to travel, like how to think about travel, how to have more in-depth travel experiences. And this book was kind of more of like, if I were to have done my gap year again, my earlier travels again, what would I have done differently? What questions would I have asked more? How would I have gotten more from it? It was quite funny timing, though, because it was written in 2019, and of course we all know what happened next. It was due to be published in 2020. It was delayed until 2021, I think, and we rewrote some of it. But the bits that we actually rewrote are the bits that have been dated, not the bits that were written in 2019. The stuff written in 2019 feels more relevant now than the stuff we rewrote to be more relevant after COVID, because we thought at the time, I don't know if you felt this way, but we thought this COVID nonsense would end up lasting forever, and nothing would ever get back to how it was. And of course it did.
Yeah. Well, that's why I moved here.
Yeah.
It very much did feel like that. It was so to have timed it so impeccably.
Yes.
It's interesting. And
Where
then,
were you for COVID?
In all sorts of different places. So I wrote that book when my wife and I were living in Budapest. She had a job there doing localization. I was doing my online thing. And then just at the end of 2019, just at the start of 2020, January or February, we moved out of our apartment and we booked an Airbnb in Saranda, Albania for a month. And that was where we got locked down the first time round. And then this was when Brexit had come into play. So I have a British passport and a New Zealand one. So getting back to the EU was becoming tricky. So I think I did my 90 days in Poland that I was allowed to do. And then we went to Georgia for a while. And then came back to Poland and went through the legalization process.
Right. It's an ordeal.
Yeah.
but you wouldn't qualify yourself as a global traveller. There's a lot of countries that are coming up in these stories. There's, I think we loosely mentioned China earlier, which I really want to get to, because that is something that not a lot of people get to experience. I experienced it for 48 hours.
Okay.
And it was eye-opening.
Yes.
So you did, how was it, a couple of years?
About
then?
2 years. Yeah. So this was right after university. I went to study a semester abroad to study Mandarin in Chengdu. So that's in Sichuan. Really exciting part of the country. And Chengdu is a huge city by world standards. It's a big city by even China standards, but it's surprisingly relaxed. It's kind of a laid-back vibe. It's known for the pandas, Sichuanese food, which is incredible. And I was at a university that didn't see a lot of foreigners from my part of the world. There were students from places like Russia and Kazakhstan. And so having a New Zealander there was very exciting for them. And it was just a weird chain of introductions that I ended up being there. And they sort of rolled me out as a kind of VIP because they thought I could be their wedge to get more Australians and more New Zealanders. So they took me for dinner with the Australian consul and things like that. And they invented some scholarship for me, so I didn't have to pay anything to be there. And it was just a very strange but wonderful experience. And then after that, I moved to Shanghai, just the city I always wanted to live in. I was there for the better part of a year working for a Chinese language school, a private company, European company that taught mostly French, Dutch, German students Mandarin and placed them in internships in Chinese companies. I was doing marketing, writing stuff for them.
And you can still speak Mandarin?
I could never speak it very well. I mean, if you were to airdrop me in China, I could order us a dinner and get us some beers and maybe a taxi, no problem. But I couldn't go much beyond that. I don't think I could have a good conversation about politics or anything interesting.
I think that's the interesting thing for all of us being expats is trying to learn another language and to be a good guest. It can be difficult. I mean, we all speak varying levels of Polish. How have you found, obviously, learning Mandarin in China, learning Polish in Poland?
Yeah, I'm a little disappointed with my own progress on Polish. I found myself, I'm quite good at quickly getting to a kind of tourist level, of confidently being able to get a beer, a taxi. Beer keeps coming up for some reason in those situations. But then once you get to try and get to a more sophisticated level where you're trying to be grammatically correct, where you're trying to follow an actual conversation like a normal person would have, or read something that's not a menu, that is where I've really struggled. And I actually found Mandarin easier than Polish. It seems a lot harder, of course, because the writing system is completely unfamiliar to us. But grammatically speaking, Mandarin is actually extremely simple. It's just simply like subject, verb, object, like I, this, that. There's no tense. There's no gender.
I like that.
There's no possessives. There's no plurals. Everything, and there's none of these declensions or conjugations. It's really straightforward. I mean, the words are like little bricks, and you can just arrange them however you like. And if you hear someone say hot coffee, you can remember the word hot, and then you can just say hot pizza, and it will work. Whereas, of course, in Polish, the words are going to completely change based on the other words that surround them and based on the weather and the stock market and whatever is happening. So it's so much harder, Polish. Yeah.
Polish is incredibly difficult, and I think that you've just mentioned, the his and the hers, and the they and the them, and the we and the I, in Poland, it's so difficult to grasp that. The endings, the start of sentences, the start of words. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we just don't have, as English speakers, which English used to have some of this, and it shed most of it, some of the ways. And, you know, you can kind of see like a little bit like he, his, him, like a little bit of vestiges of that remain. But for the most part, English is comparatively straightforward. I mean, the annoying part of English is the spelling does not correspond to pronunciation, even though it's ostensibly a phonetic language. In Polish, it actually does. So Polish can look intimidating written down with all of the diacritics and the new letters, but actually it's very reliable. The letters will always be pronounced in the same way. But we just don't really have the psychological architecture to know how to learn to change words in this way. So it's a real uphill struggle. I mean, people do it. You know, there's no excuses. I'm sure we've known expats who have managed to become fluent in Polish. So it can be done, allegedly.
So with all this travel, how do you fit in your role as a communication strategist in a watch company? Where did that come about?
So that arose from travel. It's a really interesting one because it arose during the time that I was living in China. A good friend of mine from New Zealand was doing a semester abroad at Sun Yat-sen University in Guangzhou. And over Christmas 2015, 2016, I went to stay with him for a month. It was work remotely from my Shanghai job. And one of his roommates was an American gentleman, a very entrepreneurial fellow who I met for a couple of days, and he gave me the use of his room when he went back home for the holidays. Anyway, we kind of kept in touch on social media, and he learned that I started a travel publication, and he would read it. And then at one point, he had started this watch company. One of his customers had hiked Mount Kilimanjaro wearing one of the watches. The watches are kind of geared for travelers, very durable, very sporty. And he wanted me to interview this customer and write an article about the journey that he took. And that was a really good collaboration. We really enjoyed working together, and they ended up being more of a strategic partnership. So I ended up being the one who helps him figure out how to tell his story and the story of our customers to his audience. And
Excellent.
that can be everything from the travel stories that are on our website to, hey, are we going to introduce this new watch to our community?
Excellent. And I've seen something on your blog that you run some competitions often, and you ask people to write articles and stuff like that.
Yeah, so for Intrepid Times, our publication, we run travel writing competitions. I think we just finished our 11th one. They're really exciting. So it's an opportunity for writers at any skill set. Some people who participate are quite established writers. Some people are totally new. They're normally quite short form, so 1,500 to 2,000 words, about 4 or 5 pages. And we have interesting themes. So one of our most successful themes in terms of it attracted the highest quality of applicants was called A Book Led Me There. So it was travels inspired by a book. And the winning piece was a girl, Riley Reid, and she told the story about how when she was a child, she had a lot of health problems and she was often confined to her bed, and she would read this book with pictures of Machu Picchu. And then when she was an adult, she went to Machu Picchu and they tied that together. And the influence that books have on people's travels was really, really fascinating.
Travels physically, but travels also in the, what they decide to do in a career. And I know that books have had that impact on me. I've read one book and it's taken me off to try and explore other things. But yeah, you've explored a few, because I'm hearing travel publication, I'm hearing watch business, I'm hearing some consulting. Like, you're involved in an awful lot. How do you navigate that?
Sometimes it has been too much. I've cut down recently. I'm really now only involved in the projects that are really, really exciting, but they all have quite a lot in common. That is fundamentally, I'm doing the same thing, which is that I'm telling stories. Now, it's very different telling a travel story than it is facilitating the publication of a book on beekeeping, for example. That's one thing that we do. But fundamentally, you are telling stories to a specific community. And the beekeeping community, well, that's a group of enthusiasts, very passionate about what they do, highly knowledgeable. You need to know your stuff in order to be able to deliver value to them. So we make sure our authors can do that. With the watch enthusiast community too, these are people who are extremely knowledgeable. They will spend days or hours online doing research before acquiring a new piece, and they will love it. So when you're speaking to them, you need to bring that real high level of sophistication. At the same time, watches is such a fascinating thing to write about because it's so symbolic. People associate so much meaning and identity in the watch that they wear, and they'll look down at a watch and they will remember that it was their dad that gave it to them when they graduated, and they'll think about that particular moment. Or it will be anchored in cultural memory, like Rolex is very closely associated, or Omega now, with the James Bond franchise, and you'll think about those specific ways that watching those movies makes you feel, and you'll want to feel that same way when you acquire a watch. So there is the mechanical element of it, which has been a challenge for me to learn about, but the symbolic, the narrative element that's very natural territory.
I want to talk to you about, you're writing a book at the moment about the concept of being at home. And, before I lived in Poland, I never would have thought about that. But now that I live here, it kind of it brings it home. So, first of all, you've lived in a lot of different places. So for you, what would you say is the concept of home and, that whole idea?
It's a really interesting question, right? Because for those of us who, like ourselves, expats abroad, home is always two places for us. It's here now where we've made our home, where we've built our community, and it's where we've come from. And that is considered against the default, right? The default is, people migrate for all sorts of reasons, but the default is your home is where you're born, it's where your parents are from, it's where your grandparents are from, and that is the norm. And any difference in that is something outside of the ordinary. There's this really interesting book. We had the author on our publication, Anthony Satin, wrote a book called Nomads, and what he does is he actually traces history of humanity and the interplay between settled civilizations, Roman Empire, and nomad civilizations like Mongol hordes. And it's the settled civilizations that leave behind the great temples and the pots and the artwork. But it's the nomadic civilizations that actually often impel the great changes and evolutions in culture and technology. And humans were a nomadic species before we were a settled species. Moving is very much coded into us. A baby will sleep when you walk around with it, because that's how they evolved, on the mother's hip, on long marches. So how do you wrestle with the idea of home as something you inherit when actually we are coded to be constantly on the move? And what is that? The idea of home feels very intuitive. We kind of know what that means, but does it have to be something geographical? And I think I have more questions than answers on this topic, but it's something I think would be interesting to explore a little bit more.
Yeah, I look at that as two parts. You've got the structure of your home, and then you could say that you're at home in a certain culture.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not as simple as one thing. It's many things, I would say.
Yeah, and that phrase you used, to be at home in, you could say, he's very at home in the high stakes world of international business or something. Or I don't really feel at home in that pub. And what does it mean to feel at home then? You feel comfortable, confident, you feel like you belong. And maybe it's the idea of belonging to, and that's a very social concept. It's one that you see yourself in relation to the community around you. And I think with the internet now, when you are a digital nomad, you often associate with others who live similar lifestyles. And there are people that I've bumped into from Georgia to Tokyo, say, who drift like I have, but it's a community that sort of wanders with you, or that you cross paths with here and there.
I've done some traveling where you're part of a co-living society. Mm-hmm. So there's, say, 20 digital nomads usually that have found their sense of belonging in this location that's rural Italy, and it's a beautiful concept. Have you met many people in those spheres as well?
I've not done that. It sounds really fascinating though. How was it for you? Were you with people that were like-minded? Was it an interesting crowd? Have you kept in touch with folks you met when you
Definitely,
lived there?
because most of them are entrepreneurs.
Right.
So you kind of have to be, if you're always on the travel.
Yeah.
You have to be an innovator, don't you? You've mentioned it yourself. You've started many businesses. You're involved in lots of projects because you have to make a living away from what's quite normal for everybody.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really interesting. I think that's one thing that brings nomads together outside of their home environment is business, is community, is belonging, like you mentioned. So I'm really, really intrigued to read the third book. So I've read Untethered. I've not got my hands onto this one yet, but I'm looking forward to the third.
Well, thanks so much for taking the time to read, and it's so great that the young people, Karen, are still reading. I mean, people have been foretelling the death of the book for a long time. But the fact that we can be on a podcast, new media, speak about old media books, I think is very, very encouraging.
I wanted to speak about that. There was a perfect opportunity earlier, but the conversation went a different way. But as a writer, are you concerned with the lack of reading from younger members of society? Do you think that it'll come full circle? Like, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the stats are kind of alarming when you look at that, aren't there? I mean, I don't have them to hand, but I've seen a lot of very alarmist headlines about the fact that even many people in university in the Western world apparently can't read at even a remotely what we would consider competent adult level. I mean, at the same time, I do think that how we use our minds adapts to suit our environment, right? And if you take someone from a different generation and you could put a cell phone in their hand, I mean, we've all seen that happen with elderly relatives, right? There was just a complete, as a young person, you would just intuitively know how the device works, even if it's not a device that you've had before. Whereas with a person who wasn't a digital native, they would be so frustrating watching them do it. And I think that's us now, right? I mean, we're starting to be embedded in technologies that are becoming out of date. The book has been around for a couple of thousand years. That doesn't mean it's not a few hundred in the modern form. That doesn't mean it's not going to be made redundant, made irrelevant by changing technology. But I have a lot of faith in the book and in the fact that there is always a contingent of people who read. It might not be a mainstream pursuit. Maybe it is a niche activity. Maybe it becomes a rarefied hobby, like collecting books becomes like collecting vinyl records or something now. But I think it will always have a role, for sure.
I agree, and I hope so too. I hope that is the future for us.
Just to be a little bit contrarian,
Yeah.
are books, in your opinion, because I know that I've read some fluff-filled books.
Oh, yeah.
And you could write the book in one chapter where they may have used 16. So from that point of view, is there an evolution maybe to telling stories in a more concise way?
It's an interesting one, right? Because I mean, there are these technology companies that summarize the great books in 15 minutes, and there probably are some where if you get rid of 95%, you have gotten rid of fluff and you've cut down to the essence of the thing. But we began by talking about the difference between an immersive article and a listicle, and between something that sort of just slaps the surface, whereas something that takes you deep. And you can have a sort of surface level understanding of facts, right? Like I can tell you that it's minus 10 degrees outside, but you still don't feel cold hearing that fact. You have to actually be outside to feel that. And there is something about that journey that a book takes you on. And think about the concentration. When you're reading a book, you're not scrolling, you're not being stimulated passively, you're actively absorbed.
It's kinesthetic.
Yeah, it's physical, it's tactile, you're actively absorbed in something completely analog, and your mind is doing all of the work. And that concentration, when met with decent content, I agree there is a lot of books with a lot of fluff, but when you're reading a good one, that's a leap of understanding that is quite a special thing, I think.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, actually, what you said there.
It's giving completely different perspective to the reading experience, because I've done an awful lot of reading myself, but never really thought about it from that perspective. So it's
and when you pair that with the idea of the attention span really shortening for people, it's no surprise that reading numbers are down.
Yeah, because it is a challenging thing. I mean, look, when I read, I try and read every day. I will sit down on the couch, and if I have got my phone on me, on my pocket, I will find that I'm on my phone. And I don't even know how that happened.
Yeah.
I've been reading, and then I'm yeah. And so I'll have to put my phone on a different room or in a different, out of reach. Otherwise you can't do it. So even though, smartphones weren't around when I was growing up, I've become adapted to them. Yeah. So it's going to be an interesting one for sure.